And joining us now on Sports Plus is the Hall of Famer, Bob Gibson. I was just talking to you off camera about your interest in baseball when you're just home sitting around. Do you watch a lot of baseball?
I don't. If I can tune in on a Cardinal game, and I have a satellite dish, so I get quite a few of the games on the Fox networks. But if I can't tune in on their games, I don't sit and watch them.
Now, I'm curious about that. Is that because you get frustrated with the way the game is played today, or just because you had your fill when you were a player, or you just don't like being a spectator?
I think it's a combination of things. Certainly, I don't really enjoy being a spectator. And when I watch a game, I don't watch a game like a fan does. I watch it and I look for various things, and it gets frustrating at times, and it's just not something that I want to do, sit and watch a baseball game. Like, I would never go up in the stands and sit to watch a baseball game in the stands. Never. I'd rather watch it on TV. You can get a little bit better perspective, I think.
Well, and I was going to ask you about what you think of the game today. I mean, people are going after home run records. Every time a pitcher throws inside, someone charges the mound. What's your general view about the state of the game?
Well, you know, I'd laugh about that charging the mound. I guess I'd have to be rolling in the dirt a little bit. Come on out, you know, see how long you could stay there. But I think the game is still a good game. I think attitudes have changed a little bit, but then the attitudes of our society has changed. And I think that the player today is just a product of our society. So we expect him to be like the old guys. And they're not like the old guys. Nobody is like the old guys. The younger generation is a little different, but it's still a good brand of baseball. And I think that there is a few guys that I believe could play in any era, and certainly there are some now.
Sure. The competitive fire that you had when you played, from what I've read, and we've talked before, how much of an influence was your brother Josh on you?
Oh, awful lot. I remember when I was probably 13 or 14 years old, and we had a team from the YMCA. We would go out in all of those small towns in Nebraska and Iowa and Kansas, and we'd play. And I remember one day, Josh standing right in the middle of the field because he thought that the umpires were cheating us, and he challenged everybody in the stands. There had to be 300 or 400 people there, and he wanted to fight because he thought they were taking unfair advantage. And we saw this kind of thing day in and day out with my brother coaching us, and certainly that had to have some effect on us growing up.
Yeah. Influences when you first got to the Cardinals. Johnny Keane. Really, you took off with him as the manager. Sally Hemus and you guys didn't get along all that well?
Nah, Sally, I never did care for him. He had some problems that didn't have anything to do with playing baseball, and so I just didn't get along with him much at all. Johnny Keane was my first manager in professional baseball. In fact, I signed in Omaha in the AAA, and he was the manager there. So I did get to know him. I thought he was a very nice individual, and he wanted you to play strictly on the merits of whether you had ability or not, and it had nothing to do with anything else. I couldn't say the same thing for Solly.
Yeah, and those teams that you played with, the great players that you played alongside, and I want to talk about Curt Flood in just a second. But when you think back on those times, do you appreciate it more now, looking back on it? What a great team that was in '64, and '67, and '68, throughout the '60s, or could you appreciate it at the time that you were experiencing it?
I don't think that you ever really appreciate things until afterwards, you know, until after the fact. And I sit down now and think about you know, the Boyers and the Bill Whites and the Javiers and the Dick Groats and the guys that we played with, and I have much more. I much appreciate these things better now than I did then. I was young then. I was still growing up myself, and I was involved with me more so than us. But you know, as you get a little bit older and you get a little bit smarter, and you understand that it takes a team, and it takes 2 or 3 different people to make a thing go, and you get away from me so much, and it becomes us. And I think that you appreciate that a little better when you get older.
There are some great stories about you and Tim McCarver when he used to catch you. And we don't know which ones of these are true or which one of these are just folklore, but we had him in a couple of weeks ago. And I guess the story goes that at one point he came out to the mound and you told him, you go back behind the plate because the only thing you know about pitching is that you can't hit it. Is that a true story?
That's true. That's a true story. But see, now, there's a lot left there that he didn't tell. I used to like to give him a hard time, just for the sake of giving him a hard time. And, you know, he'd call pitch outs. And, you know, Tim didn't have the best arm in the world. And I'd shake him off, and he'd call a pitch out, and I'd shake him off. And then he'd point to the dugout, and I'd shake him out. And then he'd run out to the mound, and he'd just, you got to throw a pitch out. We got to have a pitch out here. And I said, Tim, it's a waste of pitch, because if I have a pitch out, it's going to be ball 1. You're not going to throw the guy out anyway, so I'm not going to throw it. Oh, he'd get mad at me and yell at me. He'd go back and he'd call the pitch out, and I wouldn't throw it.
Well, he also tells a story that when Steve Carlton was inducted into the Hall of Fame, they asked Tim McCarver about Carlton. He said he had the greatest slider of all time.
Yes.
And at some point, you walked up to him, working your way through the crowd, and you said, greatest left-handed slider of all time.
That's true. That's a true story, yeah.
Well, those are great stories about you guys. And I guess maybe one of your best friends through the years was Curt Flood. And he did so much for baseball, and we lost him this last year, and I know that was very hard on you.
Yeah. I don't like to talk about it very much. Curt and I were very close. Obviously, closer than just teammates. You know, we were kind of like brothers, and I got to the point, or we got to the point where we just understood each other so well. Didn't have to talk much. You know, we could kind of grunt and look at each other, and we pretty much knew what we were thinking. So it was a special relationship.
Yeah. The trade, when he was first traded and decided to fight it, what were you thinking at the time?
I wasn't thinking much of anything other than I couldn't understand why they were breaking the team up.
Right.
You know, and we had a good team, and I still think that if we had kept that ball club together, we may have been able to win the pennant a couple of times more. You know, but when we didn't win the World Series in '68, and the press kind of came down on us a little bit, fat cats and the whole thing. And I do believe that Bing Devine, who is one of my best friends now, I thought that the press put a little bit of pressure on him and got him to listen to some things that weren't quite right, and that prompted him to trade Tim and Flood and a bunch of the other guys. And I just think we should have stayed together. They should have given us a couple of more years to see, you know, whether we could do it again, but they didn't. Curt did what he had to do. I thought he was nuts. He says, I'm going to do this. And I said, I'm behind you all the way, Curt, but I'll be about 4 or 5 steps back.
Do you think that the players today, can you get any sense that they understand what Curt Flood did for them, and that the salaries today are largely due in part to what Curt Flood did?
I don't think that they give it a second thought.
Really?
I really don't. And I wouldn't be surprised if there were a few guys that don't actually know who Curt was. I'm sure there are some guys who can appreciate it. I know DeShields is one that does. But I think basically the guys are into themselves, and I guess that's the way it should be. Yeah. I don't know.
In the days of Bob Gibson, there wasn't quite as much offense as we see today. There were earned run averages like you had, which I mean, people couldn't score 1 run a game off of you in 1968. Do you think that's I mean, because fans always talk about, well, got to see more offense. Or maybe the fans don't, but the press certainly talks about, we got to see more offense. Do you think the game is better today with all the offense, or not as good?
The strike zone is a miserable strike zone now. You throw the ball 2 inches above the belt, it's a ball.
Yeah.
And I see guys calling pitches that are right on the corner balls, and they make the pitcher move the ball a little bit more into the plate. They make him get it in that. that zone that you don't want to throw the ball in, and they make you throw it in there, and that's why you have so much scoring.
Yeah. Do you miss being in uniform every day, or do you like
No.
your role with the Cardinals?
I like what I'm doing right now, which is nothing. But I'm in spring training. I'm down there for the entire spring training. I never did like spring training that much, but I come back into St. Louis on occasions, and we have parties. I love to go to these parties we have, and I'm doing more PR than anything else. But I enjoy this, and if anybody there's listening, I'd love to do it every day. But I had my stint in the uniform, and that's not to say that I wouldn't do it again, because you never say never. Right. But I enjoy this.
Well, Bob Gibson, it is always a pleasure. It's great to see you, and hopefully you'll be doing more of this and we can get more of a chance to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for coming down. That's the Hall of Famer, Bob Gibson, and we'll be right back.